But I think the reason you brought this up, Stephen, was not because you were interested. When you said, like, I don't think you worded it like this, but, why does a child get cancer? Why would young Stephen have gotten cancer? I don't think you mean in a scientific sense. I don't think you mean literally explain to me the process by which cancer develops in my brain and gives me leukemia. I think you mean, why does this happen if being supervised? I mean, you asked it to Greg in the context of religious supervision of the universe, and I think the irony is that we're in a context of a discussion where usually the boot is on the other foot, and I'm sort of being told that as a non-religious person, as an atheist, agnostic, I don't have a satisfying explanation. What am I going to say at the footstool of somebody who's dying of cancer? But it sounds to me, at least today, like we don't have a very plausible alternative in Christianity. For example, I did have a few questions, which maybe I'll be permitted the time to ask. And I don't want to bang on about this, but it's important because this is ultimately, you're here to represent your view and a worldview more broadly. And this is, to me, the question of suffering. And you've explained your views about the fool, and I wanted to let you put them in full before I asked a few questions. But the first question that jumps out at me is the question of pre-human suffering. We're not the first species to inhabit this planet, and before we existed, billions of years, I don't know if you believe that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, but billions of years, hundreds of millions of years at least, of animal suffering.
Yeah.
And that is experienced. They like and you could say that it somehow is less relevant or doesn't matter as much, but if you saw me right now step on a dog's tail and watch it squeal, you'd tell me to stop, because you know that absent just the effect that has on our human situation, that's bad for the dog. That kind of stuff was going on for hundreds of million years before humans were around. That means before the fall.
That's true.
The second question I have.
Let's do one at a time.
Yeah,
if we can.
And I don't entirely know how to answer that. Part of the problem comes when you create a world in a certain way that has certain cause and effect kind of things. So pain is there for a reason. Pain is there so that you can avoid something that's harmful to the body. When you start feeling pain, you withdraw from it, okay, in a very simplistic sense. It also has a downside, and the downside is that pain is painful, and sometimes dying is very painful too. So there's a trade-off there. Now, I haven't worked all those details out, okay, but what I look at is a larger picture, because I can't refine all of those things for my own thinking. The larger picture is we all live in the same world that is filled with pain and suffering. So then the question is, who has the best explanation writ large about how that works? No explanation, well, maybe some, are going to go very granular and get here's why your baby is suffering in this moment for this thing. We're not going to be able to do that. But we can understand why the world is broken. Now, if you don't hold that the world was made for something better, then the world we see right now is not broken. It's just the way it is. There is no moral assessment whatsoever that we can make that would make any sense.
Yeah.
But we constantly make moral assessments, which is why you're bringing this issue up
about
suffering.
I've been very careful to avoid moral language for precisely this reason.
Let me explain it seems to me that you are kind of smuggling in moral categories with the suffering issue. Because if I said, I don't care about the suffering of millions of years of organisms that had experienced pain, that kind of casts me in a kind of a negative moral light. You don't have to say that. It does seem to me that you're smuggling in the notion that suffering is bad morally.
I know that people often do that. I'm specifically avoiding that because I've had this conversation 100,000 times, and that's the accusation that gets brought up. And some people do that, but I'm specifically, you can rewind the tape, I make great pains. I don't say the problem of evil, for example. I say the problem of suffering.
Okay.
If you said that you didn't care about suffering, I would say that you're probably just being inconsistent with your Christian worldview, for example. I wouldn't say that you're doing anything immoral in the context of this conversation.
So I'll accept the qualification.
So what I'm saying is that if Christianity were true, we would not expect the kind of suffering that is present in the natural world. I'm not saying that on my worldview that suffering is wrong and must be fixed and there's some moral element. I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is that it is unexpected, if Christianity were true, that suffering would be as it is.
Well,
in particular, the non-human animal suffering.
No, I understand that. Okay, and the way I'm looking at it.
But do you understand that I'm not smuggling in those moral? Sorry? Because you said that I'm smuggling in moral terminology.
Okay, and I buy that. It's okay. All right, I understand your point.
Did you have a second question?
I did, which is that if the fool is the explanation for shall we say, the moral evils that people commit, like the Holocaust. The reason why people have a proclivity to commit the Holocaust is because of the betrayal of God's trust a few million years ago, whenever it was you think it was. If Adam and Eve's transgression is the explanation for why humans have a sinful nature and act upon sin, then why did Eve act upon the sin before the fall had happened? Eve must have had a proclivity to sin in order to betray God in the first place. And so I don't think it suffices to say that the explanation for why we have human beings with a proclivity to sin, like Adolf Hitler, is because of the fall, if the fall is a result of a proclivity to sin from Eve.
The nature of freedom, in my understanding, my view, is that it can initiate things, okay? You don't have to have, in a certain sense, deterministic element in your soul that forces you to act a certain way. Why did Adam and Eve in this case, act the way she did? Because she was capable of initiating a free action.
Do you think she acted immorally?
Free action in terms of rebellion, okay? That's the nature of freedom, okay? I can't get into her mind. And I think sometimes asking questions like this, why did she, under those circumstances, do what she did? I can't answer that.
Do you think she did something immoral?
Yeah, she disobeyed God.
And what did she eat from? The tree of the...
I'm not sure.
She ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Right.
So she ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, implying that before she ate of it, she didn't have a knowledge of good and evil.
Well,
how can she have done something immoral before she
Alex,
ate it?
can I ask you a question?
Hold on.
No, this goes to a
understand
contradiction to my view, so I just need to clarify this.
Do you understand what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, I understand entirely, sure.
If she hasn't eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, she doesn't know good and evil. So how does she know that it's evil if she hadn't yet eaten from the knowledge of good and evil?
Because the knowledge of good, the word knowledge oftentimes in the Hebrew is talking about experience, okay? It is not talking about a mental awareness, okay? She wouldn't have not been able to even understand the command not to do something if she didn't have those moral categories. I think that's part of the image of God in man. Consequently, she knew she ought not do it, but she still chose, for whatever reason, to do that. And that act of disobedience created a big mess.
What that means is that the fall does not explain the proclivity to sin because Eve already had it. It does not explain the existence of evil because knowledge of that already existed before she committed the fall. It also doesn't explain the origin of suffering because, of course, Eve's punishment for eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Well, you're talking about suffering prior to human beings in animals. Okay?
I'm talking about suffering in human beings before the fall.
It does explain the fall of man because human beings made a choice that they could have made differently, but they didn't. And in their rebellion against God, it had a consequence.
But I don't think it could be called
an immoral decision. And this is why the rest of the world has unfolded the way it has, why there is suffering, evil in the world. A naturalistic explanation can explain, suffering before, suffering after, but you've been very careful to make it clear that there's no moral ramifications to this at all. It seems most people are pretty aware that there are moral ramifications. So if your worldview does not have a way of making sense or moral intuitions about suffering, even animal suffering, it's not an adequate worldview.